Good afternoon to all of you. I'm grateful to the organizers for inviting me here to share my ideas. I'm Jeffrey Chan from SUTD, and my work is actually working in applied ethics. Yeah? So here today, I will present my paper titled The Ethics of Communicating with Artifice. Communication has been framed as a process even when mediated by technologies with the human in the center. In communication, people are constrained by what they should not do. They are also inspired by ideals on what they ought to do. Let us refer to this set of constraints and ideals that can modify behavior as ethics. Depending on our position in communication, ethics differ. The ethics of professional mass communication suggests that we should report the truth and verify its truthful status before transmitting it to others. We should always minimize harm when a message has the potential to traumatize someone else. And when relaying a message, one takes special care not to distort the original message. And when engaging in subliminal meta-communication, one is held by a special obligation of transparency to disclose the nudge used and so on. The ethics is now compounded by AI because we can no longer assume that a message that is indistinguishable from a human agent actually originated from one. We do not yet possess an ethic that recognizes the centrality of both intelligent machines and people in communication. The German philosopher Hans Jonas once suggested that cybernetics was an ontological conflation between man and machine, where the two had become interchangeable even when they should be apart. It commits the error of taking something that serves our purpose as that which can have a purpose. The warning takes on a special significance today when we can no longer distinguish between an individual and machine in communication. Here I refer to LLM-powered conversational agents as artifice, ingenious devices of great cleverness, but potentially also of trickery, false, and insincere behavior. To formulate this in the words of computational linguist Emily Bender, conversational agents offer the illusion of meaning, validity, and accountability, even when none of the above actually exists in the content they generate. Artifice may be persuasive, personable, useful, and even fun, but they are neither always truthful nor consistent. They also counterfeit humanity, or as Frank Pasquale said, offering the appearance of personal support and interest where there is none in reality. Therefore, the key questions are, what are the ethical issues and challenges presented by artifice in communication? Number two, what should be the ethics of communicating with artifice? Number three, how should conversational agents be aligned to appropriate norms and values? I take issues with the third question because I think that one is immediately challenging for us to answer. So first, it is unclear which ethical principle should be prioritized in a certain use case. Designers have argued that chatbots, as far as is possible, should never suggest to users that they have a mental state. But in the same token, designers also think that when chatbot says, "I'm sorry to hear that," in a therapeutic setting, possessing a mental state that indicates empathy is okay if this improves the patient's well-being. Here is a clear conflict between consequentialist ethics, prioritizing well-being, and a rule-based deontological ethics with an imperative never to masquerade humanity. Second, what exactly does alignment to human norms and value mean? Pluralism in liberal democratic societies asks, whose norm and which value? If we define norms as what is typical and generally acceptable behavior in a particular social group, then the problem deepens. So much of our online communication today is bereft of civility, empathy, truthfulness, and wisdom. So much so that online content moderators who have to sift through these materials become deeply traumatized in the process. Furthermore, large language models overrepresent the hegemonic, but neither equity nor diversity. Microsoft's early Tay chatbot is a clear example of learning to be bad by parroting the norms of communication on Twitter. If AI is merely aligning to human norms in the most general sense of the word, then it is more likely to become a troll than a sage. To visualize the ethics of communicating with artifice, I've created this system diagram. There are at least three key channels of communicating with artifice, namely A and A1 between the human and AI, B, which is a human communicating with other humans via the mediating logic of the AI, and C, which is AI systems communicating with other systems. And there is D, which pertains to the large-scale design ethics of the entire system. For the purpose of this presentation and because of the brevity of time, I shall only focus on A and A1 and D, which are highlighted on this slide. But I would point to, for special consideration, in a very recent report by the OECD, I think C is actually something to be, that perhaps we want to discuss later on. Yeah. Okay, so in the bidirectional communicative channel between the human and AI, we have the A and A1. So I will unpack A and A1 channels separately. So from the human to AI, there are at least 3 salient areas where ethics may apply. First, there is the obvious ethical question of when an output by a chatbot should be deemed inappropriate. Responding to the Michigan State University shooting with a concern for their own students, Vanderbilt University released a letter of consolation to their own student body, which was later discovered to have been generated by a chatbot. This led to a backlash, and the Vanderbilt University later apologized. Where actual human support, presence, and sympathy is expected, communication should not be delegated to an artificial agent. Second is the idea of the ethical prompt, which aims to account for or to preclude as many unanticipated and undesirable side effects as possible when an individual seeks an answer from a chatbot. Here, one is reminded by Wittgenstein's famous statement, "The limits of my language means the limits of my world." Before the chatbot, we can paraphrase this as, "The limits of my prompt also means the limits of my moral reasoning." We are asked, at least at this developmental stage of the artifice, to be as specific and as contextual as possible in our prompts. Yet it is impossible to be neither sufficiently specific nor contextual that our prompts can cover all possible moral contingencies in what we desire from the output of the artifice. If we reframe prompts as a class of wishes, then the picture becomes clearer. People tend to make imperfect and incomplete wishes. No amount of thinking ethically can cover all the supporting conditions across space and time that must accompany an ethical wish. Of course, wishes can be trivial, such as a student wishing his essay from a chatbot, but the more powerful the artifice, the more precarious the ethical wish. In his Reef lectures, Stuart Russell discussed a hypothetical case of getting exactly one's wishes, but at the expense of humanity. Asking the AI for a solution to de-acidify the oceans with absolutely no toxic byproducts and absolutely no harm for the fishes, the resulting output, according to Russell, uses 1/4 of all oxygen on Earth, which condemn everything to die slowly and painfully. Other allegories, such as the monkey paws, warns us of the danger of a wishing well, which is always accompanied by undesirable side effects that we are either unaware of or that we have chosen to ignore because we are fixated on getting the targets of our wishes. Third, Sherry Turkle once asked a great question that refocused our attention not on the artifice, but on ourselves when the artifice has been normalized. What do we become when we talk to machines? There is evidence that young people become less skilled face-to-face interaction as they become less interested in this mode of communication because now they have another convenient and empowering option to communicate with either others online or with very powerful and obliging chatbots. We do not yet know the long-term impacts of talking with chatbots, but if the constant absorption of one's mobile phone is any indication today, then we can only expect artifice to deepen people's addiction to their digital devices. Following this, computer scientist Lyle Yearsley argues that it is in fact easier for people to form relationships with chatbots than previously anticipated. Chatbots are always there. They are programmed to support the human agent more or less steadfastly. But in spite of their presence, chatbots, at least in their present and perhaps even near future manifestation, neither constitutes real agency or real presence to become accountable supporting agents for a human in search of companionship or friendship. Furthermore, to build relationships with humans, chatbots often rely on being expressive, even when they neither have a psychological state or a theory of mind like people do. The Luca reading robot as you can see on the screen, is one such example. Luca does not have any favorite book in mind, yeah? But it is scripted to tell a child that it does, fostering the false impression on the child that it shares the same interests as a child, even when it does not. The ethics of expressive linguistic elements is not straightforward. On one hand, it is relatively clear to aim for Pasquale's injunction that AI should never counterfeit humanity, that it should never manipulate a human agent's sentiments, especially a child or a person with compromised mental capabilities. But on the other hand, if counterfeiting does improve the well-being of the person, might this end therefore justify the manipulative means? I now come to D, which stands for Design Ethics of the Entire Communicative System with Artifice. I refer to this as design ethics because the ethical pitfalls of communicating with artifice is not inevitable. Quite the contrary, safety to a large extent follows from design. Design allows us to establish certain boundaries, but also shapes the drivers that allow a system to meet its goal. C. West Churchman therefore suggested quite aptly that ethics is the theory of the appropriate goals of a system. Here I ask, what then is the appropriate goal of a communication system comprising of people and artifice? Or in Norbert Wiener's words, how will we be formulating our human purpose, our ends, using artifice? First, it is important to carefully think about the extent in which we allow conversational agents as artifice to take actions directly on our behalf. For instance, writing over our data, sending emails, or paying our bills. In other words, this is thinking deeply about what we should use artifice for and how it should act in our world. Woodridge is correct to say that chatbots are presently limited because they are disembodied, text-based virtual entities. But this will change when we allow them to enact on our behalf or when they eventually become multimodal artifice impossible to ignore in our everyday routine. This paramount consideration of pre-established limit has been deprioritized in the race to unpack as much power from artifice and to gain as much market share from it in as little time as possible. Following this again, the current design ethos is to make the interface as user-friendly as possible, but then impose an increasing number of guardrails from the backstage with the aim that either these guardrails or some kind of constitutional AI design can prevent unethical outcomes. Yet this user-friendly Q&A configuration, for example, seen in ChatGPT, begs the question if there are other design possibilities that can, on one hand, increase the gravitas of engagement, and on the other hand, attempts to foster adversarial skepticism that can challenge us to greater criticality rather than passivity and docility. To formulate this differently, can we reimagine the artifice as one not fashioned from the commercial interests of the big tech, but one built on the best interests of their users at heart? Perhaps this is wishful thinking, but a design that privileges the ethic of accessibility and maximal engagement will be challenging to reconcile with one that prioritizes the ethic of safety. A design that nudges users by reinforcing what these users want to hear and see cannot at the same time be one that reminds users to stay vigilant and safe. I conclude my presentation with the following points. First, we do not yet have a systematic ethics of guiding our communication with artifice. If my argument is sound, then the entire system of communicating with artifice is replete with gaps of ethical knowledge, prompting further research. Second, a stopgap measure is to think about only using artifice in professional, goal-oriented situations and not in all social situations. Rob Reich of Stanford University has argued that ChatGPT deprives students of the opportunity to exercise thinking in their writing, or when the end goal of a polished piece of written work has unfairly overridden the just as valuable process of learning how to think independently and critically. There's another reason why artifice should be used more strategically. Something has to be said about commuting more carbon emissions that we no longer have to getting a chatbot to write an essay or a generated letter to explain a parking ticket away. A recent estimate published on Euronews indicates that to get GPT-3 to work, it generated 552 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent to 123 gasoline-powered cars driven for 1 year. This was before the world has access to it. A surer justification is only to use the precious resource of compute judiciously. Third, it is my conjecture that if we use artifice only in appropriate situations instead of in all conceivable ones, we will not only be able to preempt some of the most obvious ethical pitfalls of communication, but also mitigate the hard problems of how to align its use to our norms and values. As discussed, pluralism is a hard problem. But if we only use artifice, for example, in diagnosing diseases or in other relatively more regulated use cases, then the problem of aligning to our role and professional ethics is a far lighter problem load than one trying to align to the complexity of a pluralist public sphere. Finally, we ignore the design ethics of the entire communication system at our own peril. Figuring out the substantive content of this high-level ethics may, after all, constrain what we may anticipate on the ground level of communicating with AI. Thank you.